Hey, Risto here with George Mason University. We're talking to Dr. Julia Sargent today. She's at the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University in the UK. Julia is an avid lover of selfies, as I learned at the ASIP conference in Scotland, and just an all-around great person. So here we go with a new episode of Playing with Research in Health and Physical Education. Now, the article we're highlighting today is titled Flipped Learning, Pedagogy and Digital Technology, Establishing Consistent Practice to Optimize Lesson Time. It was published in 2019, so just a few months ago, in the European Physical Education Review. And thank you so much for coming on and joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be invited onto this podcast and to get to speak about a little bit more about my own research. I'd also, while we're here, like to acknowledge my co-author, Ashley Casey from Loughborough University, who was also heavily involved in writing this paper with me. So hello to everyone who is listening, wherever in the world you might be.
Awesome. So this paper just published is about flipped learning. And this strategy has gained a lot of traction with some educators as it really maximizes the hands-on learning time and could have a huge impact on what we can cover in PE. So for those of us who are not familiar with what flipped learning, or sometimes people use the word flipped classroom, is, can you explain that to us?
Yeah, sure. So flipped learning is a pedagogical approach that has been growing in popularity, particularly in higher education. It's an approach where the notion of classroom-based learning is essentially inverted, and it tends to redirect attention in the classroom from the teacher and onto the learner. And in the paper we talk about sort of two main learning phases. The first phase is the pre-class phase, where students are set a type of homework by the teacher. So this might be to watch a video and respond to some questions, or to read a research paper, or even a podcast, for example. The student completes this work in their own time, perhaps at home or on their commute. And the second phase occurs in the classroom itself, where student-centered activities are designed and facilitated by the teacher. So this might include peer discussion or quizzes, for example. And one of the many affordances of flipped learning is that it allows material to be explored outside of classroom time and develop students' initial understanding and knowledge comprehension. So in-class time is dedicated towards developing and deepening students' learning. And digital technologies such as videos, apps for designing quizzes such as Kahoot, and platforms such as virtual learning environments or VLEs are commonly used to deliver flipped content. They can also enable teachers to collect student responses and have queries or answers.
Yeah, and I think that this is covered in a lot of different subject matter. I think I've seen it a lot in university settings, but I think this could be huge in physical education settings to actually get really deep into that content, especially in places where there's time limits on how many minutes that you can actually do. So now that we know a little bit about what flipped learning is, what was the goal of this paper? What did you want to find out?
Yeah, so our intention with this paper was to increase understanding of what flipped learning is, and also how it can be applied in a PE context. For me, this is particularly important as there is a real sort of sparsity in knowledge regarding how and why teachers use flipped learning, and in conjunction with digital technology as well. It's a topic that has been scarcely examined in PE and sport pedagogy research. So we wanted to find out how it's being used and for what reasons, in order to consider not only the benefits for teachers and students, but also the role of digital technology in that learning process.
And in your study, you had two PE teachers, and you chose them because they self-identified as users of digital technology. Now, who are Patrick and Dylan? I'm assuming not Dylan Landy.
No, not Dylan Landy. Hi, Dylan, if you're listening. Yeah, these were two teachers that I worked with during my PhD study, working in secondary schools in the UK. They're both really enthusiastic and great people to work with who were passionate about digital technology and teaching in PE.
Now, you used a case study approach and conducted themed interviews. You went to the school and visited the schools. You did a document analysis to get the full picture of how flipped learning and digital technology was being used. One of the main things you uncovered was the method of how flipped learning is being used. Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So for these teachers, flipped learning was used in a way that was used consistently in their practice, and it was established as a real routine for their students. So this consistency and routine was really important because students became familiar with the approach, and it meant that they saw the use of technology within flipped learning really as a learning tool and not as a gimmick. So for example, both teachers created flipped learning mats, which were essentially guidance worksheets for students to complete whilst they were watching, say, a video or reading a paper, for example. And they used a variety of technologies, such as Twitter to support students' discussions, Google Forms to design quizzes and to give assessment, and actually to deliver the flipped content. They also created videos for students to watch and view this flipped content. And they also showed this, for example, in changing rooms on TV screens or on iPads to actually demonstrate the skill or talk through the lesson objectives.
There were some great examples in that section that you were covering now of how flipped learning was used that could be quick to attempt by practitioners in PE contexts. Now, the second question is, why was flipped learning used? Can you share on that?
Yeah, so for these teachers, they gave sort of two main reasons. The first one, because it allowed them to optimise their lesson time, and two, to support their examination PE students. So the use of technology in conjunction with flipped learning, it enabled the teachers to use their classroom time more efficiently and effectively for physical activity, because students had gained some of the basic knowledge in their home-based learning tasks. So using time effectively was particularly important given the limited curriculum time that you mentioned that's often allocated towards PE, and the need for students to be physically active in their lesson time. This approach was used to support their examination PE students because they felt it supported and supplemented their learning. It developed their own assessment of and feedback regarding students' work. And it also allowed the teachers to provide more student-centred practices. A particular example I think that stands out to me is providing screencasts of the teacher marking the student's exam script, providing verbal feedback so that not only the feedback is personalised for the learner, but also they could review this feedback at their own pace and in their own time.
All right, so one of the terms you used in there was examination PE, and I'm not sure that everybody, I know in the US we don't use that term. So can you explain what exam PE is or what type of students they are?
Yeah, so a typical program of how it would work in UK schools is we have years 7, 8 and 9, which is essentially we'd have 3 years of what we call core PE, which is national curriculum governed PE. But then in years 10 and 11, students can opt to take what we call GCSE, or some schools will do a BTEC program, which is essentially a curriculum with some optional subjects. And at the end, the students will have an examination and an endpoint qualification that they can then use for further study.
Right, and I think in the US, because it's different from state by state, you might go into certain states and have a 9th and 10th grade PE requirement, like where I'm at now. We have a 9th and 10th grade PE requirement. Then students could choose to do advanced PE, but that advanced PE is so all over the board. I've seen really good educational programs, and then I've seen, basically a roll out the ball to an advanced degree. Hey, pick out a basketball and just go play basketball. And It's a bunch of athletes in the class. So it's kind of all over the board. So why in the UK, why would a student opt to do an exam PE or one of these two programs that you talked about?
I think there are loads of different reasons. I mean, if I think about my own reasons, it was because I really enjoyed PE. I wanted to, with the thought of teaching it in the future. But then for some students, it's not necessarily a PE teaching route, but it might be to support them in that, having that qualification for further study in aspects such as sport and fitness, coaching, physiotherapy, for example. So it's a qualification that would help them for a route forward into sport and fitness, or a PE occupation.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it's important to understand, because if you go to Ireland or Sweden or the UK or Australia, New Zealand, and the US, there's so many different contexts of PE that we're doing research on similar topics, but how PE is viewed is so different, or the structure of it's so different. But all right, so let's go move into the discussion. The rationale Patrick and Dylan gave for their use of flipped learning and digital technology was that it allowed them to A, optimize students' lesson time, and B, support their examination PE students. They also said that they felt that flipped learning helped students enhance their knowledge outside of school so they can be more active and effective inside of school. Now, I know that one of the issues here will be that kids don't want homework. It's going to be a struggle for many teachers to overcome that barrier. So how did these two teachers do it? What were some of the keys to their success here?
Yeah, I think that links back to when I was talking about how the approach was actually used. So the approach was successful, so flipped learning was successful when it became part of that routine of the classroom, just as homework is in many other subject areas such as English or maths. Well, it is in the UK. When it was used consistently, it became the norm. So it was adopted by students. It became part of their classroom routine. It was also successful when the content and the resultant student learning fed forward into the next lesson. So students could see that continuation for their learning, and also having the effects of more time for physical activity. Other successes from the teacher's perspective were pre-planning to ensure that there was diversity in the content, to ensure that students were also motivated, and lots of trial and error to find strategies that suited their context, their styles for teaching, and also the learner.
Now, what's the take-home message here, and what are the next steps in this research?
So the take-home message in this paper is that if teachers can use flipped learning and digital technology in a consistent and routine way, then it may be able to help optimise the lesson time and provide support for their students' learning. It also provides a little bit of a framework for structuring the use of digital technology in PE. Taking this research further, I'd love to work with other physical educators to see how they are using flipped learning in different contexts, especially as we've highlighted the differences, for example, in examination PE. Given that I'm now working in a higher education institution and at a university that delivers courses online and at a distance, I'd like to work more with students to understand their opinions of the approach, and the ways that it could facilitate teaching and learning for PE in the future.
Thank you. I want to thank you for your time. We really appreciate the work, the interesting concept of flipped learning. I think it could be really useful in physical education settings. Can you let people know where they can find more information on the current work you're doing, or your social media and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter. My handle is at Julia_Sargent. Or you can also keep up to date with my work through my university profile page, where you can find my email, etc. I'd love to have a chat about my current or future work, so please do send me a message. It'd be great to get in contact.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to link to the article, put all your information there, so anybody that wants to reach out can just look at the podcast notes. And that's all we have for you on this one. Thanks for listening.